She was a woman who bent the world to her will, a queen whose very name still echoes with mystery, desire, and power, Cleopatra. To her enemies, she was a seductress who bewitched mighty men and brought empires to their knees. To her people, she was a savior, a ruler who fought with every breath to keep Egypt free from the iron grip of Rome. But behind the gold crowns, the silken robes, and the famous coal-lined eyes lay a story of survival, genius, and unshakable ambition. This is not just the tale of a queen. It is the story of a woman who dared to challenge the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Cleopatra VII Philopator was born in 69 BCE in Alexandria, Egypt, into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a family of Greek origin that had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great. The palace she grew up in was a place of marble splendor and dangerous whispers. Intrigue and betrayal were part of daily life. The Ptolemies were notorious for murdering their siblings to seize power, and Cleopatra's family was no exception. From a young age, Cleopatra learned that survival was an art form, and knowledge was her sharpest weapon. Unlike many royals, she didn't hide behind luxury. She was the first of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language fluently, embracing the culture of the people she ruled. She also mastered Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Latin, becoming one of the most multilingual rulers in history. This was no ordinary queen-in-waiting, but the throne of Egypt was never guaranteed. At just 18 years old, she found herself co-ruler with her younger brother, Ptolemy III. Barely a boy, yet the advisors around him schemed to push her aside. Within a few years, Cleopatra was exiled, stripped of her throne, and forced into the desert. Imagine that. One of history's most powerful queens, wandering as an outcast, her crown stolen, her future uncertain. Yet she did not crumble, she plotted. And when Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, arrived in Alexandria, she saw her chance. The story of her return to power has become legendary. Smuggled into Caesar's presence, some say wrapped inside a carpet. Cleopatra knew that this was her moment to charm not just the man, but the empire he represented. Caesar was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her wit, her intelligence, her confidence. Together, they defeated her brother's forces, and Cleopatra reclaimed her throne. But this was no fairy tale. Egypt was still under the shadow of Rome, and Caesar's presence meant that Cleopatra had to balance loyalty with independence. Their union produced a son, Caesarion, and though Rome whispered in scandal, Cleopatra saw in him a chance to secure Egypt's future. But fate was cruel. Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, and once again, Cleopatra found herself alone in a storm of political chaos. Many rulers would have broken under the weight of such losses, but Cleopatra was not like other rulers. Enter Mark Antony, Rome's brilliant general, a man whose destiny would forever be entwined with hers. When they met, sparks flew, not just of romance, but of strategy. Cleopatra saw in Antony a partner who could protect Egypt's sovereignty, and Antony saw in her a queen who matched his ambition. Their love story became one of the most famous in history, filled with passion, luxury, and political alliance. They held extravagant feasts, dressed as gods, and presented themselves as rulers of both East and West. But behind the spectacle, they were fighting for survival against Rome's rising star, Octavian, the future Augustus. The clash was inevitable. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra's forces were crushed. The dream of an Egyptian-led empire dissolved. Back in Alexandria, as Octavian's armies closed in, Cleopatra made her final, fateful choice. Rather than be paraded through Rome as a trophy of conquest, she chose death on her own terms. The story goes that she allowed an asp, a venomous snake, to bite her, ending her life at just 39 years old. Antony, unable to live without her, had already fallen on his sword, and so ended the reign of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Yet her legacy lives on, not in defeat, but in the way she defied every expectation. She was not merely a temptress, as her enemies claimed. She was a strategist who held her kingdom together for nearly 2 decades against the might of Rome. She was a scholar who spoke as many as 9 languages. She was a ruler who understood that power was not just taken by force, but by intelligence, charm, and resilience. Even now, over 2,000 years later, Cleopatra remains larger than life, a symbol of ambition, allure, and the eternal struggle for independence. She reminds us that greatness often comes not from victory, but from the courage to fight against impossible odds. If you find this video adding value to your life in any way, please take a moment and subscribe and like. And if you want to go further, write one word, value, because it helps way.